Life on a Slave Ship, Part 1. From approximately 1525 to 1866, 12.5 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Middle Passage to serve as slaves in the New World. The journey across the Atlantic Ocean was a terrible and painful experience for the millions of men, women, and children who were captured and sold into slavery. Life aboard slave ships was agonizing and dangerous. Almost 2 million slaves would perish on their journey across the Atlantic. Those who survived the crossing often found themselves in a living nightmare from which there was no escape. In the 18th century, European powers, including Britain, France, and Spain, transported Africans to the Americas to work on sugar plantations, tobacco farms, and cotton fields. The demand for labor on these plantations was high, and the supply of indentured Europeans was low, leading to the horrific practice of African slavery. Millions of Africans were captured by European traders and their local allies in brutal wars, and then forced onto slave ships bound for the New World. The conditions on these ships were unbelievably cruel and inhumane. Slaves were packed into ships in such tight quarters that they could barely move. They were chained together and left without any room to lie down. The stench of human waste and decay filled the air, and the only sounds that could be heard were the moans of the dying and the screams of those who were being tortured. The sailors on these ships did not consider the slaves to be human beings, but rather as cargo to be transported. They were treated more like animals than people, and were denied basic necessities such as food and water. The slaves were given just enough food and water to prevent them from starving or dying of thirst, but this was not nearly enough to keep them healthy. Many slaves became severely malnourished, and those who were pregnant or nursing babies were especially vulnerable. Medical care was non-existent on these slave ships, and the slaves were forced to live in their own waste. The conditions on these ships were so bad that many slaves lost their minds. Some went mad with grief and despair, while others simply gave up hope of ever seeing freedom. One of the most horrific aspects of the slave trade was the practice of throwing overboard. When a slave ship was approaching its destination, the captain would sometimes order the slaves who were still alive to be thrown overboard. This was done to hide evidence of the slave trade and to prevent the authorities from knowing the true number of slaves on board. The slaves were usually thrown overboard at night, and they were given no life buoys or other flotation devices. Many of them were chained together and thrown in, and they struggled in the water as they were pulled away from the ship. Others were shot or beaten before being thrown in. The sight of slaves being thrown overboard became such a common occurrence that some people actually bet on the number of slaves that would be thrown out. To make matters worse, the surviving slaves on the ship would have to watch their friends and family members be thrown to their deaths. This was done to break their spirits and make them easier to sell. Despite the unimaginable horrors of the slave trade, many slaves refused to give up hope. They sang songs and told stories of freedom to keep their spirits up, and when they were finally set free, many of them quickly began working to end slavery for others. The legacy of the slave trade is a reminder of the darkest chapters in human history, and a testament to the resilience and strength of the human spirit. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe and stay tuned for more historical tales. And remember to leave a comment below with your thoughts on life aboard a slave ship. Thank you for watching. See you next time.